Hello, everybody. My name is Luis Rodriguez, and we have as a very special guest Joe Loya, and we're promoting his wonderful memoir book, The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell. And I just want to say a few things just to get us started. You're welcome to Tia Chucha's, welcome to be part of our Tia Chucha family here. We do these events quite frequently. We have a great bookstore here. We also sell books online. So this book and all kinds of books, in fact, any book that you want, whether we have it on the store or not, is available at the Chucha's bookstore. So you go to tiachucha.org/bookstore, and you can get The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell, as well as any other book, our Tia Chucha Press books, and any other book that we have. I just want to say something, Rose, before we start. This book is a second edition that was published originally by
HarperCollins.
HarperCollins, yeah. And we did, well, I'm saying we did. Barking Rooster is an imprint that I started that does books about redemption. We did this really beautiful book by his friend Jesse
De La Cruz.
De La Cruz, a beautiful book, Detour, about his life after close to 30 years in prison and how he changed his life and became a professor and all these great things. We have a lot of stories like that, but this is a very beautiful, important book that we published just as the pandemic hit, which is kind of sad in the sense that we couldn't do what we wanted to do with it, but now here we are, we're pushing the book because it's a powerful book, it's good all the time. So Joe, welcome to Tia Chucha's. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, and I think maybe what we can start is if you could say a little bit about the book, but you really, again, we're just going to talk about whatever you want to talk about.
Sure.
This is your time. But so people can know, the book's been out for a few years now, but it's still powerful. So maybe you can say a few things.
So the book was published in 2004, so 18 years ago. I got out of prison 8 years before that. And so I was working on the book, sold it to HarperCollins, finished it, published it. And, it chronicles, I got out of prison when I was 36, so it chronicles, when I was born in the Maravilla housing projects in East LA, raised by a Protestant family, the Protestant, early Protestant, like back in the 60s, there weren't that many Protestants. And in fact, when I went to private Christian schools, Protestant schools, and then when my mother passed away when I was 9, they took us and put us in public schools in Montebello, and it was like a culture shock to me. Like it was a sea of brown people, and they all on Ash Wednesday had marks on their. I'd never seen that before. I was like, because that was back in the day when that was like Catholics did that regularly. So like all my friends who were Catholics in 6th grade, 7th grade, they're all Protestants now. They're all like evangelical Christians.
That's a big
like they caught up to where we were early adapters of that in East LA. So I was raised kind of alienated from everybody, but then my dad was really very religious, hyper religious. Like by 18, he was teaching himself Hebrew and Greek for the Bible to study the Bible, and eventually he would become a pastor. But he was also really violent, and so he's super abusive. When my mother died, grief took over and kind of demented him and stuff. And so it was just really rough home life. And the book chronicles how when I was about 16 years old, during a really vicious beating, I tried to kill my father and stabbed him in the neck and went to foster care. But that woke up violence in me. And then I decided that once I got out of high school and started trying to go to college, that wasn't for me. I was too angry. Couldn't concentrate. Had a lot of PTSD that I didn't know at the time. We didn't know anything about that at the time. They didn't have no name for it. But I would get stressed, and then I would just get like paralyzed, and I even went to the doctor once because I thought I was dying because I was sleeping all the time. Like I was so depressed. I would sleep for 15 hours and wake up and be exhausted still. And they didn't have a thing that my doctor's like, oh, you just need to exercise kind of thing. So I wasn't getting treated for the brutality, the death of my mother, the violence, the trauma of trying to kill my father who lived, but still, all that, nobody was helping me process. So I just ended demented with rage and confusion and anger, and I decided to like push myself in the criminal world because I felt like, at least in the criminal world, I don't have to worry about what anyone thinks about me out here anymore, right? I don't have to feel the pressure of all the expectations. So So I kind of gave up on the track of going to college and maybe becoming a lawyer or something like that, or even a theologian I had contemplated. Because I really did love Jesus. I thought Jesus was like
The coolest thing.
I loved love, man, and I love because my mother was a really loving person. I got a lot of affection and love early in my life, so I knew what love felt like, right? I knew the frequency of love.
Yeah.
And so when she died, and then my dad got demented, it was like, wait, where's love? Where's love?
Right.
And I kind of always loved those stories where Jesus was always with the
Those are great
underdogs
stories.
and all. Yeah, I love those Christ stories, right?
Yeah.
So, but I lost my faith, and I was all angry, and I started shoving myself into criminal world, and that's all in here. Like, how did that happen? How do I go from being the sweet little kid who wants to, love Jesus, and then rob 30 banks between 88 and 89, I robbed 30 banks in a 14-month crime spree. And then I ended up going to federal prison for 7 years. I'd already done 2 years in state. So I ended up doing over 9 years, got out when I was 35, 36, and this ends on that first day out of prison, where I had done all this work. I would spend almost 2 years of solitary confinement, and I did all this work on myself, and I gave up on the crime game and decided I wanted to be a writer. I had a 2-year writing pen pal friendship with with Richard Rodriguez.
Yeah.
Richard Rodriguez.
Yeah.
And the essayist, and that was powerful. That changed my life
Right.
in terms of writing, and that's what changed the trajectory of my life. When I got out in 1996, I started writing, and so that's what this is about. I'm writing the next memoir about what happened the last 26 years.
But let me just say, it's powerfully written, which is really important.
Thank
Because I know a lot of guys come out of the prisons, really good guys, and they just can't write. But their stories are powerful. What makes this important is not only do you have a powerful story, you can write. And writing, I think, is what helps get the story out to a lot of people. Because now you got the language, now you got the storytelling skill, and it's very compelling. And when I read the book, I read it a long time ago, but one of the things about it was you went back from East LA home, back to the prison, back and forth. And it just so happens that East LA, the area you're talking about, I know very well. Just north of Montebello was my neighborhood. So everybody in my neighborhood either went to Moorkempo and Alhambra, or they went to Sure in Montebello. And so Montebello was
I went to Sure
like,
for summer school one summer.
yeah, so we hit, and then Garfield, my first wife was from Garfield, she's all from City Terrace up in Gary Lomas, so I know all the
People went to
neighborhoods.
Garfield.
Yeah, so it reminded me about all the places I've been through, including the Valley, because you mentioned Burbank, and I lived in Reseda. In other words, you situated me anyway. But I think what's very helpful is for anybody that doesn't know this life outside of East LA, your details of that world is compelling for anybody. Because I think people from across the country can say, hey, this is America. I mean, this is
That's
not,
exactly right.
It's not an exotic place out in the world. This is America, Mexicans in the U.S. and the things they go through in those neighborhoods and going to Whittier Boulevard and shopping and everything. So I totally relate to it because it was a world that I was in on as well.
It was important for me when I wrote it because, I spent so much time as a young man. My imagination wasn't, even though it was transgressive, and I was always trying to break the rules because I was starting to act out early because my life was just shit. It was just like all this hypocrisy, so I didn't know how to process it. So even though it was transgressive, I did start off early, spending a lot of time thinking how I was going to be just, a regular person and an American, somebody who gets out of high school, goes to college, gets a job, and does what we do around here, right? And I felt like my life got dimensioned into crime, and then it became this dramatic thing, so that I have really big cinematic mode, like trying to kill my dad. Like, I met so many men in prison who got beat down by their father and didn't try and kill him. They beat him down, get off my mom, punched him, maybe hit him with a bat or something like. But nobody ever stuck a knife in their dad's neck, twisted, and tried to kill him, right? So I had a very specific narrative that has all these dramatic high points, but I still wanted to make this story accessible. So anybody who's been abused can get access. Anybody who's been divorced, anybody who's death of a parent, anybody who was born with a sort of dementia religiosity in that lifestyle. Like, there's a lot of ways. Foster kids, because I was in foster care, like, people got to access this and never have robbed banks, never have been in prison.
Right.
Obviously, if you've been in prison, then of course, or in the underworld in any regard, then you're going to relate to it. But there's all these access points to my story that have nothing to do with crime, And so it was important for me to write a story that gave everybody access to this story, and it was through language. My language isn't alienating. My language is literary in that I was raised with so much books, so much literature. My father was really was savvy in one way, I don't know what underwrote his desire, but he did emphasize that he never wanted us as Mexicans to be at war with the English language.
Yeah.
So he pushed us, and he had us read, devour novels. I mean, I remember going to bed when he was at college. He was at UCLA when I was in 8th grade, and he didn't have a lot of time because he had to do 2 jobs, go to school. He was a hustler. So what he would do for bedtime is he would get his Norton literature college book, and he would read us what the story he was supposed to read for the night. I was reading. He was in 8th grade. I was being exposed to Kafka and all these great. Like I didn't know what the hell their stories were about, right? The hunger artists and stuff. Like I didn't know the lottery. I was like, what the hell? This is crazy. But he was exposing me to them, and also getting his homework done at the same time. But as part of his thing is that he did not want us to be to use language without thought. He wanted us to be very careful, and he wanted us to seduce with language, especially because he was a preacher, and it's all about like looking out and drawing you in, and really, to get their hand in your pocket, or if not to get their hand in your pocket,
there really is
at
power
least
in language.
Yeah, the power of language is at least to like calibrate your spirit to his spirit, so that you guys he could lead you. But my dad was very influential in doing that, and it also prompted me to really want to write that kind of accessible book.
So I think that's an important point. I think it was true for me too, because my dad was a very learned man in Mexico. Now, he didn't speak English. What he would do is have books in Spanish at home, but he did something that I'm sure everybody relates, the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah.
He got those books, and nobody in the body had these books, but
we did.
I know, but people that when they did, they had them, and I loved those books. I probably read everything that was there. I mean, I can't read the whole thing, but it does help you when you get language and books in your home. My mom used to read the Spanish language. It was called El Tesoro de la Juventud. These were old stories in Mexico that they would give, and she brought it over from Mexico, and she would read these stories. It's the treasury of youth. I don't know how it's translated. That helped me think about language and words, that if your parents and your family love books and love literature, teach them, read to them, give them books, because it really helps them. Because the worst part is when you're going through what you're going through and you got no language.
I had no language. Here's the thing, I had language, like surface language. I could titillate people. I could say things, people are like, ooh, look, he's a smart little kid. But and it might have been impressive on a superficial level, but I wasn't giving any language to help me understand why I was so troubled, why I wasn't so, because the only language it gave me was unhelpful. Oh, why are you doing this thing? You're a sinner. You're a bad kid. You're in league with the devil. Like it was all that. It wasn't like, oh, your mom died. Your dad's beating the hell out of you. You're being raised at a home where everyone thinks he's this great Christian, but he's super abusive. I mean, so abusive that the courts would have to take him away from us. Like it was terrible what I was going through, and nobody could give me any language that could help me process any of it. And so, to me, like. Now, I've homeschooled my daughter since they were in 4th grade, because my daughter had a challenge reading. So, like, I devour, like, I'm fast. In fact, one of the things I did before I started robbing banks, I was like hustling, trying to make fast money. I sold Evelyn Wood reading dynamics. Cool. Remember back in the day, the old Evelyn Wood reading dynamics? So I went to like all these universities in Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, and I would sell the program, and then somebody would come in and teach it, and I had to know a little bit of it to sell it. So I became really super fast at reading. My daughter has like a dyslexia kind of thing. So it was important for me to give my daughter language, but not like I need you to just be just regurgitate and be articulate in a superficial way. I've spent a lot of time as a father now, because of what I went through, saying you're going to take a lot of hits when you grow up emotionally. That's what happens to us human beings. I don't care what home you come from. I don't care what beauty you had, what innocence you had as a kid. When you grow up, a lot of stuff's going to land on you, and it's going to be painful. It's going to be hurtful, and a lot of people are going to betray you. You're going to grow, and you're going to learn that you find ways to be courageous enough to keep trusting. But bad things are going to happen. People are going to die, whatever. So I'd say, so let's talk about it. Let's work at it. And I would say, what do you think about that? And I would ask questions, and then when they would try to give me an answer, I'd say, oh, so what you're saying, let me see if I understand it. And then I would take it and put more words on it, tuck them in there, and they would say, yeah. So I would do that, and then they would repeat them, and that was me like giving them language to say, I'm grafting more language onto the language you gave me, and now you could take it, utilize it, and then I could hear them later in conversations using the language that I was helping to give them. That was about describing emotional states of being. Because to me, telling my story is great. Writing for Hollywood is fun to create stories all day long. But I was raised without giving language that had utility for me emotionally. And so to me, what's most important is to help people have language when they're telling their story, to understand their story emotionally. And so I try to have this conversation to see if I can help give them language so they can process it in themselves and figure out how to give me that narrative back of their life that's more textured.
You know what? That's so important. And one of the things I love about the title, because the title
is a story.
It not only is it a story in itself, but it's also a metaphor for anybody. We're all in some kind of a prison. Mm-hmm. And we can get comfortable in that prison, regardless how it is. Some is literal prison when you're actually sitting in a cell. Some is just the prisons of whatever it might be. And even being hit very hard with religion, the way it is, it's a prison. It can be, as I've seen it. It can be a liberating thing if you understand that. But outgrowing the prison cells of life, to me, this became, when I even saw the title before I read the book, I really figured it out. I know what he's trying to get at. Because outgrowing it requires that kind of crafting, developing, stretching beyond the cells of whatever prison anybody could be in. Sometimes it's just addiction. Sometimes it's the traumas of your life that imprison you. Sometimes it's relationships, you know.
Sometimes even your own brain has, you have chemical imbalances, and it kind of like, you have to figure it out.
But outgrowing it is, to me, the key. And maybe you can say a little bit more about that, because I think that speaks to a lot of people.
Okay, so what's interesting about the title is, when I pitched the book, I pitched this title, The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell. The reason is, I knew a guy in prison. His name was Heavy. We nicknamed him Heavy D. He was a man who was 660-something pounds, and he was.
You thought he was an elephant.
In here, the first time I saw him, I had stabbed an inmate, got on my handcuff, stabbed an inmate. They took me down to the basement, and they had to clear a cell, and then to put me in the basement, where then you, in order to get out of your cell, you have to have handcuffed behind your back, and then 3 people have to escort you down the interior at all times. Like, it's hyper, the whole. And they were escorting him out, and I heard this high-pitched voice, and then I jump up in this holding cell, and I look at the side crack of the door, and what I see, it's hard to describe, but what I saw was, I thought, like cattle. It was just big. There was a line of work that what we call it, in our house we call the ass a line of work. You know, like, oh, I see your line of work. But it was like a big line, but it went all the way down because it was this thick. And it was just all the way down, the skin was scaly, and then it just was gone. And I was like, what the hell was that?
At first you said it was an elephant?
I thought it was a baby elephant or a cow. I couldn't figure out what it was, but it was this guy. So he was so big and so heavy that when he stood up, he leaned forward and he was on a cane. And they only gave him a sheet to walk around with. And during the day in his cell, he would sit on his bed, and then he would be able to throw his sheets out because he leaked. Anyway, it was a fascinating story, but the point is, he was, everyone nicknamed him Heavy D, and I would come out of prison and tell the story, hey man, you want to hear about the story about the man who outgrew his prison cell? And they were like, what? I'd say, no, it's no lie. So Heavy D was so big that it took him about a minute and a half to wiggle through the door, because narrow prison doors, and he was big, but he could get through it, but he'd have to like woo and wiggle, but it became a security hazard, and so they took him upstairs. That what they were doing, they were moving him down the tier to clear that for him to help him lose weight, and the reason we know how big he was is because he came home from court one day because he had socked a lieutenant in the jaw, broke his jaw, and so they put him down there again with us. because he was too hungry. He was like, I gotta eat. When you guys are starving me.
Go raging.
So he got mad, and so he comes down there, and when he goes to court, he came back. He was like, hey, I weigh 670 pounds, and because the judge wanted to know how much he weighed, because he was just such a big guy. They took him down to the post office, put him on a postal scale that weighs like 1,000 pounds of mail, and that's how he was able to find out. That's how I know how much he weighs. So like, anyway, the point is, I came out of prison. I would say, you want to hear the story about the man who outgrew, and everyone wants to hear that. That was like, and because I could go on for 50 minutes with that story. It's an amazing story. It's very sad or whatever, tragic. So when I went to sell the book to HarperCollins, I pitched this title, and they're like, no, let's come up with other things. And so I pitched them a bunch of other things, and one of them got a hold of a copy that I had sent them originally, the one-man show I did called The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell. And after almost a year of thinking about it, they're like, hey, why don't we do The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell? I was like, yeah, why don't we? Since that's the original one I had.
I think your editor there was my editor at HarperCollins, Renee Alegria.
Renee Alegria at Rio, right. Yeah. I love Renee.
No, Renee's a good guy.
I love Renee, yeah. So he did good work, man.
Yeah.
He was a hustler. He was an agent, and then at night he put together a whole thing saying, listen, you need a Latino imprint.
Yeah.
And he
And
made them
published some amazing books, including 2 of my books, so I
Yeah,
know exactly
I love
what you're
him.
talking about. But that's a great story because, again, it's not just about the physical aspect of it, which is one thing, but I think the metaphor for how you have to outgrow.
Yeah, well, then that's why it works, because he literally outgrew, and all through the book, I show you how I figuratively outgrew my prison cell and my bondages, because that's really what it's all about, right? It's like when I was trying to change my life, I didn't think, okay, so I'm going to change my life. I want to stop robbing banks. It wasn't. I want to stop committing crime. I was like, I want to change my life. So what is my life? My life is a scatterbrained mess. I'm confused and angry and pissed off. And every time I respond to it, I just dig myself deeper and deeper. So what do I want? What is change actually? It's not just let me stop robbing banks. Because I know people who stop committing crimes, and they're still driving their life and into the dirt and hurting a bunch of people around. So I said, I want peace. I want to find that love, that elusive love I want to look for love. I want peace. And so the bondage to me was like this fog in my mind of like, I was certain I was always right. Everyone was stupid. There was a bondage around that, right? Like very limiting, and also there was all this pride, this vanity there it's all constricting. And all constricting energy.
There you go.
And I didn't want that. I wanted growth and light. I read this thing while I was in there once. It blew my mind because I was raised in a very fundamentalist religious upbringing. And I read this thing about this guru this guy was writing about how he was really excited. He went to go meet this guru, and he was doing all this meditation stuff and whatever. And the guru comes out, and everyone's been worshiping, and when he comes to the front row, and this guy he's kind of got some privileges in the ashram, so he's now up there. He's going to meet the guru. The guru is talking to certain people as he's coming down, and really, and when he comes to this guy, he just looks at him, and for some reason he appraised him instantly, and he's like, oh, I know what this guy needs. And he gets a feather, and he just tickled him on the nose and walked away giggling. And this guy was so upset because he felt so disrespected. All of a sudden his vanity came, and he was like, he realized that was what was at play there. And I was like, ooh, I want to be like that guru. I want to be laughing and lighthearted and not take myself too seriously. That's what I wanted. That became super attractive to me.
Well, I think that's an important thing for anybody. I think the religious thing is a very important part of your story because of the
religion part.
Because I think all religion has the capacity of liberating you, but most of it, what it does, and this is because I know it's in my family too, they went from Católicos to evangelicals too, was this restrictiveness. And I think it's important for people to know they're all metaphors for how to live life. Yeah. But if you literalize the metaphor, you get caught in the trap.
You know what I'm saying? It is a trap.
The metaphors is what's important. The message is important. Not to start literalizing it to the point that you're actually stuck in things. And then you have all these issues where people can't even be talked to because they're so caught up in the restrictive literalization of what are really good messages. You know what I'm trying to get at?
Dude, of course, because one of the problems I had was when I really started examining my life, I realized, all this prison's hyper maleness, and so I didn't stop stabbing people after my dad. I was violent. In prison. I ended up in solitary confinement for investigations and stuff, big serious stuff. So I was violent in prison. I was a violent man. And when I started changing my life, what I realized is that a lot of my behaviors and certainly the way I looked at the world was this hyper maleness. And it fit real good, and it was easy for me to dial up just basic generic stupid maleness to hyper maleness when I became a criminal and went to prison, because religion had undergirded all of that. Religion and that was it just really made me certain about so many things as a man and about my place in the world as a man, that one of the things that was the big turnoff to Christianity was exactly that I felt like it had failed me. It had allowed me to become this fragile male that was offended all the time. I didn't feel like, I felt like the religion, or the spiritual themes that would draw me in had to not feel weighted with maleness. And I could sniff, because I thrived in a hyper male environment. One thing I could do is I was always, one of the ways you survive in prison is you're always looking to see how somebody's insecurities could come back and bite you in the ass. You're always looking for people's weaknesses, sizing them up, and insecurities are the things that are most dangerous. That's how guys get killed. You disrespect somebody, he inflates in his mind, and all of a sudden you're getting stabbed at chow, and you don't even really understand why. So I got to understand all these ways in which we men are petty and small, and particular to maleness around the you got to respect me, all that kind of stuff. That's prevalent in prison. And so when I came out looking for the things to attract me, I would always try to sniff out the root of maleness at it. If I couldn't find it, I was like, okay, I kind of like this. Which is one of the things I love about all the things that are happening now in the LGBT community and the they, them. I love that I have to struggle with every time I say she or her now, I'm constantly she, they, or it's a thing where I'm still working with it, because to me that's changing things at the level of grammar, and I feel like we've been trying to change things at the level of policy and shit like that. It's my dad's generation, my generation, the generation after me has kind of not been very good, but this young generation, they understand if we're really going to do anything revolutionary, it's got a change has to occur. Now, there's problems with that. They got youth and they got change, and they're going to be doing it, and then they're going to have to bump up against all the backlash, and they're going to have to bump up against the things that are going to come from that.
They got to have answers for that, which is hard.
They what?
You got to have answers for all that.
And they have the enthusiasm and they have the ideas, and I'm all for it, and I love that. I'm 60 at this age, and I like my daughter. My daughter called my dad on the phone during the last election, and said, I don't care who you vote for, you need to vote for who I want you to vote for, because that vote, you're old, you're out the door. Your vote needs to be for your granddaughter who you love. I need to pocket your vote. It's for my generation. Who you put, and I came home and they told me what they told me what they did, and I called my dad, and my dad was laughing. He goes, I love my granddaughter, man. They're great, but I feel like there is this energy, and I love it. I'm like, I want to be uncomfortable.
It's kind of liberating, because here's the thing, again, going back, I always felt that the churches, and almost any church, was always abusive. And it's one way or the other, like when they talk about God gives you free will, but they didn't, it's not free will if you choose to go one way and you get punished for it. It's like, wait a minute, it's not free will. I'm gonna exercise free will, and I'm not gonna believe in the church. That to me was free will. But it's really weird when you're in a confinement, and it doesn't even matter what religion is. There's an aspect of it that wants to control you, and you don't really have free will within the confines. Now, what I find liberating was when I let all that go, and then the beauty and power and poetry of the Bible made sense, and even the Quran. And even the Buddhist teachings, all these things began to have resonance with me, because now I could read beyond what somebody was telling me was bad about it, what's good about it. Okay, yeah, it's all God, but now you're open to, there's a beautiful wisdom and teachings in every one of these things.
Absolutely.
And if you're open to it, they all can take you somewhere and teach you things. And that to me is part of free will, being able to actually have ability to choose things without worrying about what the end result of it. The best end result is that I think you live a decent life. You live a life that everybody's trying to tell you to do. Every religion, I tell people, and I do this in the prison all the time because you have all kinds of religions in there, and you have atheists and you have everything, but they're all in my classroom, and I go, okay, isn't every religion trying to get you to the same place? Different ways of getting there. It's one narrow road, but all the roads meet, and that's how you can, at the very end, be a decent human being. You know what I mean? You know, and that's really what they're all trying to teach you in their own way.
They were all answering the questions of their time, all those ancient.
Yeah.
Because they were all, most of them were all desert religions. I mean, there was the Chinese.
The
They started. All of these river civilizations, where the civilization started on rivers.
Yeah.
They all start building up and growing up, and they start realizing what's the meaning of all this? And every one of them confronts what we all confront.
Yeah.
Like, why am I even here? What's my purpose for living? What are we supposed to? What is it all about? Like, and so we've had these questions, and people have been answering these questions with their ideas, with their philosophies and their religion. I love Bible stories. People are always, in my family, are surprised when I tell them, "Oh, I teach Bible stories to my daughter all the time," because they're not weighted with, like, capitalism and American exceptionalism and all these other things. Is the way I was given those stories, right?
Yeah.
And they're not. And I take away the martial themes out of it. Like, when I was a little boy, when I went to church, it was all, I may never march in the infantry, ride in the cavalry, shoot the artillery. I may never zoom over the enemy, but I'm in the Lord's army. It was all very martial, right? Like very militaristic. Whereas when I tell Matilde the stories, they are, it's like when I teach Greek myths to them. I love all these stories, and they love it because they're not getting Bible stories the way I was with all this other social stuff on it.
And that rightness.
And then no. It's just like, hey, this story was from a time, and look at these characters, and look at the things they do, and of course I have my spin on it, and I got my own vulgarities about it. But I definitely love these stories. I love Bible stories.
Yeah. So I think that's why it's important for having even literature like this. Again, let me remind people, this is a Tia Chucha Central Cultural and Bookstore, and we do sell books online. Go to tiachucha.org/bookstore, and you can order this book, The Man Who Outgrew His Prison Cell, Joe Loya. You can order, of course, any book that's there, but also any book you want. Barking Rooster is distributed through Tia Chucha. So this is the one place where you can order these books. But it's a very important book, and again, the lessons are important for anybody. You don't have to have gone through it to know the powerful, compelling way that he tells a story. You get exactly what he's going through and why, especially because it doesn't glorify any of that life. It doesn't demonize any of it. It just tells it the way it is, the way it unfolded. It's very powerful.
Some of the best, I live a very sentimental life, very sentimental life, which I love, I just love to have a lot of big feels.
Yeah.
But in the writing, I try to be even though I try to, share the emotions of feeling stuff like that, I don't, like you said, I don't glamorize certain lifestyles. I try not. And it was interesting when all the reviews came out, how many people, including the New Yorker, which I was fortunate enough to get a review in, said that, it was very unsentimental. Because it's like I'm not trying to make myself look, I was just trying to tell it as cleanly and as clearly as possible, and let people draw their own conclusions from it. I wasn't trying to guide any, manipulate anyone's emotions. Yeah. If I was trying to manipulate any emotions, it was this. The book is basically 3 acts. The first act is like decline in wrongdoing, a lot of wrongdoing, and then the ascent out of wrongdoing. And I wanted people at the end, I wanted people to be challenged in the middle. I wanted to be a sympathetic character at the beginning, to tell you how my childhood existed, because I was a kid and a lot of stuff was happening to me that I had no choice about. I had no say in sexual abuse, physical abuse, death of my mother, the violence. I didn't ask for none of that, and it's happening to me, and I'm just trying to navigate my life. But then when I get into the bad, I'm really, really honest about the bad.
Yeah.
Like super honest, and it's almost hard to read, and because I make it challenging, because at the end, if the writing holds you, then at the end and you follow it through, then it'll pay. There's a payoff at the end, because you'll see that all that stuff, I made it through, and then there's this hope.
But
at
it
the
also
end.
says something about how high and deep that ascent was. Because if it was just, well, what people go through in this ascent's one thing, but you really went down, dude. And the ascent shows itself in such a way, finally when you read everything, you know who you have become and the kind of person you are. And I know you personally, you know that you've come a long ways. And it didn't require hoops. It required finding the right key to the right door. And you being able to say, this is what the door is, this is the key. And,
That's very true.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. It's interesting you say that. When I came out of prison, what I found, one of the most alienating things I found when I came out of prison, I would try to connect with people, is when they would say, I can't imagine you did any of that stuff that people say you did.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be disheartening, because it's like, well, if you don't know how far I came, and you don't know how fucking hard I worked to get to, like, just to be regular like you guys, like, then you won't understand. You won't understand who's really in front of you. Like I applied rigor and pain and almost died several times because it was so challenging to turn in another direction. It was so hard. It was really, so that was what was actually good about it. Is I could say, you want to know how bad it was? Here it is, you know. And then the podcast, there's a podcast, The Score, Bank Robber Diaries. You can, wherever you get your podcast. I also tell these stories about my life, and it's actually this. It's not as sober as this. It's actually, there's a lot of fun because I have a lot of great fun stories to tell. And you know, it's the thing about humor and our lives. I don't know how you find it, but I love to laugh. And
you're a funny dude, and
thanks,
this book has got a lot of funny
Yeah.
moments.
You know, and it comes from my father. I'll tell you a quick story about humor and why someone who comes from my life, why I love to laugh so much. I have like a barking rooster laugh. Like at home, I just crazy laugh. But when I stabbed my dad, I went to stab him, and he turned like that, and I ended up stabbing him. I always thought I stabbed him here in the neck, but I ended up stabbing him back here, like where the muscles are between where the spine comes up. I stabbed him there and barely missed his spine, but I stabbed him in the muscle back here. So I come out of prison 26 years ago, and I'm staying at my brother's place, and my dad and I have resolved to figure things out. Like, our love story is big right now. We really love each other. We go in jails and talk about to people who are abusing their families and tell our story and stuff. Like, my dad and I have a great love story, thriving love story. We healed ourselves. But when we first came out, it was like, Dad, I've been a shitty man. You've been a shitty man. It's just my bad cancels out yours cancel out mine. Let's start fresh, man. And he was like, yeah, shook on it and everything. So he comes over. I'm making him a sandwich, and I turn around, and his back's to me at the table, and I'm like, hey, what's that? And I touched that nodule on his neck, and he looks up at me, kind of like, he gave me the oddest look, and I'm like, what the hell is that? Oh shit! That's where I stabbed him, and he thinks I'm joking, but I didn't really grasp what was going on. That's the scar tissue, right? And I said, I'm sorry, Dad. Because I know he has a lot of shame around that. And I was like, man, I'm sorry, Dad. And we started eating our sandwiches in quiet. It's real quiet. And he says, my dad, man, is such a fucking cool guy. He says, you know, when you stabbed me, this is the first time we ever literally talk about the actual, you know, he says, when you stabbed me, I instantly knew it was my fault. The Bible says don't exasperate your children. And I had exasperated. You loved me as a boy. You loved me. No father had ever more love. And there you are trying to kill me. He says, so I took the responsibility. Joe stabbed me. That's on me. I said, when you started twisting it, trying to break it off of my neck, I said, oh, that's just Joe being an asshole. And he just broke. But see, this is the thing about my dad. He broke it, and I spit my food out. We're laughing. We tell that in prisons, the guys they're all like, and then he just releases them, and then everyone just, like, it's great. It's great because we love to laugh. We have to laugh. We've gone through such terrible things. Yeah. We've experienced such terrible things, and we look for these moments and these things, so we don't we don't get stuck in the trauma of it. But also, it says something about my dad. I want to sit on this point for just 1 minute. My dad's a very gracious man. My dad acted against his conscience and did terrible things. I thought he was a monster because he did monstrous things. He did monstrous things. but he was not a monster. Just like I did monster scenes, but I'm not a monster. And when I saw that in my dad, I saw the actual beauty of my dad. My dad's a good man. He's a funny man. He's a learner man. He gave me a lot of tools to be a good dad. Oddly enough, even though he like these spiked moments in my childhood that were really, really terrible and dramatic, a lot of the basic stuff, my dad was actually really cool. He was super affectionate. You know, like I said, he's playful, really playful with language. So I got a lot of really great things from him. And that moment where he knew that I felt bad, genuinely, he gave me an out. He gave us a little humor there, right? I love that.
You know, I think that's very important because, again, my work in the prisons, I find that everybody there could be worked with. It's hard to imagine because we know people who have done some terrible things. But I find that it's those little things and those nuances, the lack of judgment, but also the importance of getting people to understand the mythological nature of what people do. There's a mythology there that's kind of in there, and if we live out this mythology, we're actually living out stories. And these stories are important, and then you don't have this big judgment. That's why we punish all these people, put them away, and just make things worse. You know, we think that because we don't see them, they're sitting behind bars, everything's done. The level of forgiveness that the Bible's about does not really get happening till you go to a prison. Till you go to some of these institutions with people. People who have killed their homies are sitting there in the same cells. I've seen this. People who have, you know, all kinds of things you wouldn't imagine. How can people forgive people? Forgiveness is a tricky thing, but there's a mythological aspect of it that I think has to be understood. We're going to open it to question, but I want to say one last thing, then maybe you can speak on this. I love to tell Homer's Odyssey when I'm in the prison, because again, these myths are important. And when you reread the Greek myths, the martial stuff is there. They're all going to war and everything, but underneath it is this really highly developed nuance. So the Odyssey is the perfect monolith myth, right? The hero's journey. Joseph Campbell was a big deal on that. And I think the hero's journey has value. There's a unhealthy hero's journey that I've seen people do. But the general value of it, I find, is no matter what you go through, whatever ordeals, because you're going to go through ordeals. And Odysseus went through 20 years of ordeals, a whole war, and then he went through ordeals trying to get back home. Yeah, 10 years of war and then 10 years trying to get back home. One ordeal after another. He lost all his crew, he lost everything. But what happens is he comes back stronger. He comes back, as Joseph Campbell says, to bring a boon to the place where he came from, to come back to make it better. So I always tell these guys, at a certain point in my classes, I get to the point where you have a choice. Whatever's happened to you, whatever you've done, you can either now curse the world with it or bless it. This is your choice. And bless it means you've been through something, you have experience, many of them have language. What can you do to help change the world from everything you've been through? And I want you to speak on that because I think you're actually an embodiment of the hero's journey. Again, I always say there's an unhealthy way of doing this stuff because the hero's thing can be over-dramatized. But if you understood what it's trying to say, everybody's a hero of their own story. You know, and everybody has that capacity and that choice. No matter what they've been through, you can curse the world or you can bless it. And blessings is what we have to do now, especially you get older. You get older, and then you have to, I have to bless the world now with what I know, with what I learned, what I experienced, with my art, whatever it is you develop. What do you say?
So a couple of things I want to say about that is that, you know, I white knuckled it through this thing. Like I didn't do therapy, I didn't do anything. I wrote my way out of prison and I wrote my way into this new life. I had Rich Rodriguez to encourage me in our thing, and he didn't come from my lifestyle, and I couldn't be honest with him about all the things that I had done in there and that I was. You know, that I was grappling with because I didn't want to put that stuff in my letters as they went out. But so I grappled the things that were the deepest things that I had to change. I didn't have community to help me, but what I did have, as I had loving family. My family loved me. Grandmother, my grandfather, grandmother visited me, my aunts. People were praying for me, even though I didn't believe in God. One thing I believed in is I believed they believed, and they were like in there and they were doing prayer chains and all sorts of. And they would always say, "Mijo, I'm praying for you." I was like, "Keep praying, keep that prayer chain going," because like I believe that the power of prayer isn't that God hears me and He's like, "Oh, I'm going to spare this youngster here." I believe the power of prayer is that they they have all this goodwill that they're putting onto this universe.
And it actually
And
comes
that,
in.
and I believe that they believe and that they love me, and that knowing that love
Yeah.
and getting that affection on the phone, or even them telling me that they got a prayer change going, those are bear hugs in there,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like, I'm getting love. It's coming through me. It's
Yeah,
rippling
that's
through the
exactly
phone right into me. So it's powerful, even though it's in its own way. But
Yeah.
that was the community I had to help me not feel completely alone at this. But yeah, I mean, I understand how you can almost track my story as this hero's journey and through this thing. But I also think that, like, I want to share a story with my father, which is a really important story. When I got out of prison and we started changing our lives, my dad had less lift than I did. Like, I already had a lot of metaphors. I had already done a lot of work on myself. I'd done a lot of change, and I had lift, and I had promise, and there's all these places that were starting to, like, lean into me and say, hey man, we want you to write, we want you to do, and I started writing for LA Weekly and LA Time op-ed page stuff. So, like, people wanted to hear what I had to say. Richard had opened up a literary world to me. My dad didn't have any lift. All he had was years of shame of thinking he was the shittiest father ever. Because, for years we just threw it on him. We, just weighed heavy on him. And I came on to him, listen, Dad, we can't have you wallowing. He would always say, oh, man, I was a terrible dad. And, I told him, you think that your dad, being my dad, ended at 18? I said, you didn't stop being my dad at 18. You're still my dad.
Yeah.
And get this, I need you to be my dad to show me the end game.
Yeah,
You kind of fucked up a lot in the beginning. But you can't take that back.
No, you
But what you can do, let's reframe this.
Exactly.
Quit saying I'm a shitty dad. Be a good dad. Start now.
Yeah.
Show me how I'm supposed to be my model.
Exactly.
Show me how I'm supposed to move towards getting older and moving out of this thing.
Yeah.
And he took that like, whoa. Because what he needed was somebody to help him shift his narrative. And what me and my brother have done is just showered him with love and affection. And every time something good comes in our life that he inspired or that was modeled to us and we didn't even know it, it just came under the radar and now we're like my dad and it's all this, like something really good. We call him, hey, check this out, man. Look at what you gave me as a boy and look at how it's moving through me now.
Well, you helped him outgrow his prison.
We helped him outgrow his prison cell, but also in his hero journey, he couldn't do it on his own. Which is what the hero journey is like. Get it up, pull yourself up by a bootstrap, go fight all the dragons. You're gonna lose all your men along the way, but you're gonna stand victorious and then go back. My thing is like, a lot of people can't do it that way. We need to like press. We need to get a lot of love, or we need community to buttress them. We need to hold them. We need to let them know it's all right to cry. We need to say, hey man, I'll walk with you a couple steps. We need that in our journey sometimes. I white knuckled it and it almost killed me. I'm fractured and broken in a bunch of ways that I don't know how I'm ever going to heal those things. But I got up and I came forward and I was able to put this together and put it together live now where I'm a TV film consultant, writing for TV. I'm creating a show
So that's part
right
of
now.
where the toxic masculinity has to be thrown out.
Yeah.
It has to be all these imprisonments that people get, the idea of the patriarchy overbearing on everybody's lives. We begin to challenge these things that have just been limiting us as human beings. And I think that's where we're at. Anyway, I want to see if there's any questions here in the audience. We have a few people here, but also from the online. But let's start with people here in the audience. If anybody wants to start, ask Joe any question. Anyone have something they want to offer? Yeah, go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about the early years when you got out and the struggles and how you dealt with them? Because I have friends who've been out a year or two or three, and some are doing really well financially, but everyone's struggling emotionally.
Yeah, you see, yeah. It's really hard. I wrote my first essay actually was for the San Francisco Examiner about how, a lot of people when they mess up and go back, it's 90 days. 90 days is a big number. And I was afraid of 90 days. I was like, oh, am I going to make it? I need to make it past 90 days. The thing that I had discovered in prison was the power of vulnerability. I understood, I became vulnerable to myself. I became compassionate with myself because I had been a rank self-loather. I had been somebody who really hated myself and thought I was the shit. Really listened to a lot of those voices, believed those voices from my childhood. So to give myself a lot of love and to be compassionate with myself and to give myself space to mess up, was helpful because I understood that if I'm gonna stay out, I have to be vulnerable to people. Now I was lucky too, because this woman I knew when we were 14 and 15, we were neighbors, and we used to make out all the time in the laundry room, and we never were boyfriend girlfriend. Like we literally ignored each other at school. But when it came time, we just had to like lock lips and just it was like this weird thing. I don't think she really liked me that much. I'm not sure I liked her that much, but we couldn't keep our mouths off each other. Anyway, I met her a couple months before I got out of prison, before I got arrested for the bank robberies. And then when I went in, a year later, she got divorced and started visiting me on Thanksgiving weekend. And this woman came in and loved me for a while, and that was really instrumental in when I found love with this person. I realized, oh, this is the first time I've ever actually loved someone, because I was willing to like, hey, if you need to go love someone else, I get it. You know, you need to like. I was willing to do that stuff, which it was so foreign to me that I cared about them more. So when I came out of prison, they were with somebody else that they were unhappy with, but I was like, well, I love you, and let's figure out how to get you happy. And that was being vulnerable to another human being and experiencing love was powerful. But it didn't mean that I was going to not have these moments of what they call fatal peril. There's a moment where we all confront something, and it's a moment, if we mess up, we're going back to prison. And we might pick up another case, and we're never coming out. It might be, in my case, you know, I have all this violence, and at the time 3 strikes was out. I had 2 strikes. So I slapped somebody, I'm going to back for life, right? So I couldn't be violent. And I remember this one time I was with this woman. We were out having dinner in Pasadena at the Crocodile Cafe on Colorado, and there was this homeless man walking across the street. And I mean, totally homeless. He looked like he looked like he'd been on the street for 30 years. Like just his clothes were ragged. He was almost like a parody of homelessness. And he stood in the middle of the street and all his ripped garments and stuff like that, put his arms out, and all the traffic's going by him, honking, whatever. And everyone's here talking about him, and the waiters and waitresses are talking about how, you know, crazy he looked and stuff. And I'm feeling all this compassion for the guy. Like, just really like, oh man, he's in pain. That's all I see is pain. And he comes and he comes in, he sits out the edge of the patio, and they're like, all the waiters and waitresses are talking about, oh, do we have to serve him? He stinks and all that stuff. And I'm telling the woman I'm with, like, man, this poor guy, he just wants to eat. If he has money, man, they should give him a service. I'm on this dude's side, loving the guy. I have a feeling for him. And he looks over at me and I look at him, and I'm ready to give him like the nod of, like, hey man, I see you, what's up? And he says, what are you looking at? You blankety blank 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 beaner. just railed into me, and I was like, what? And I just like, and all the heads turn like in prison. It's like, we don't play much chess, but we think it's your move. And I'm like, oh shit! Now I felt called out, and then my violence just went whoop, and I was like, I felt threatened, and this is my night of my moment of fatal peril, because in that moment, you know, I'm a stabber and I'm a choker, and so I'm like, I'm looking at my silverware, and I'm like, what do? I can't know. And I'm like, bring it down. I'm doing all the little techniques I have to bring it down. And I bring it down. I'm like, well, what if he comes over here? Oh shit, I gotta like grab him. No, if he comes over, it's fine. He doesn't have to put his hands on you. It's all right. He's allowed to come over. What if he puts his hands on you? Oh shit, I gotta stab him in the eye. Like, I'm going crazy. I'm going up, and I realize I'm so stuck now. Like, I'm in crisis. I want to preempt everything by just going there and booking them, you know? So I tell her, hey man, here's the money, pay, and I'll go get the car and come around. And I get in the car, and it's like when I was going to the bank robberies, all my anger goes to my hands. So I'm just like, I can't keep my hands on the steering. They're just like bouncing off. They're like, everything is just, And so I dropped them off, and I realized, like, this is how the bank robberies happen. I would get angry, and then the next day I'd get my weapon and I'd go rob. I'd go take it out on a bank. And so what do? I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to be vulnerable. I call my brother and my dad, and I say, I need you guys to grab your sleeping bags, and I'm picking you up. I took him to my little studio, and my dad slept at the door, and my brother slept by the window. I said, do not let me out. I was like Lon Chaney on The Werewolf, where he would say, tie me to the chair. It's full moon tonight. I'm going to become the werewolf. Help me out. You know, I was like,
actually a metaphor
it was
for that
almost
kind
like
of
that was the
thing. Yeah.
metaphor. I was like, do not let me out tonight. Oh, shit. And I was just lying in bed because I'm hearing, oh, you're a punk, you're weak, you let that dude fucking embarrass you in front of everyone. I'm like, no, that's the bravest thing you've ever done. Look at, man, oh, you walked away, you're smart, you're gonna survive. Oh, you're weak, you're like, I'm having these two voices, and all I can do lie in bed is just cry. I'm paralyzed with just like, what are that, Bucky Roosters?
There you go.
So I did what I needed to do. In the morning, we woke up. My dad's reading he's sitting there reading by the door on his sleeping bag. My brother brushes his teeth, comes out, and I get up, and they come and move to me, and it's very touching. Even thinking about now that we all hugged it out. I made it through the dark night of the soul, man. Yeah. But I did what I needed to do. That was the most dramatic moment, because I was like, if I did not make myself vulnerable to the people who love me and let them know what I was going through, that's the problem with a lot of guys that come out. We want to share with people, but because we have disappointed people so much, they have loved and believed in us many times. Yeah. And they've given us the benefit of the doubt. They've given it, and they're exhausted. And we're embarrassed for ourselves that we made them go through that. We made them spend so much energy believing and then disillusioning them and disappointing them. We don't want to break their hearts again and say, I'm struggling again, because then they're going to be like, oh shit, here we go again. But what we need to do is that. And so in this case, I like put my pride away, and like, I only know I'm going to survive this if I get love at me, if I get surround myself with love. And that's how I survived that night of fatal peril.
And let me just say that I mentioned it to Joe, that today is my son. He got out of prison 12 years ago, and today is his anniversary of being
Big
out.
deal.
It's a big deal for him because everything he's been through, I saw my son go through. All the changes and everything he had to go through to find the strategies, whatever it is, to keep him from going back. And he's lasted 12 years. And to add something to it, I was in Chicago last week, and I actually had to go to an Illinois prison to see his daughter, my granddaughter. She's now serving prison time herself in one of the same prisons that he was in. It used to be all male prison, now it's a women's prison, and she's in the same prison that he was in. So this is a sad thing, but it's part of what you got to help. All these things that we're talking about, I hope help people who are in that world, who come out, who feel that they're not able to make it. Again, that's about as a powerful way of understanding what you have to do. Surround yourself with all kinds of ways to not cross that line. And it's an easy line to cross. And again, always remember, am I going to curse the world or bless it? And what can I do? And hopefully that gets you through enough times, because with my son, I think now he's at a point where he's not going back. I don't see that. I mean, he's reached a nodal line. You never know, because, anything can happen, but he's reached a nodal line where so that's what they want to get to.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, a nodal line.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, back to
I just have a question. It has to do with, I think it's a real kind of critical thing, and that is judgment. Because sometimes we think the judgment is harshest from the outside, but I think really the hardest thing is the judgment we have against ourselves. And so it's interesting that you were able to kind of get through all that. But at what point did you realize that that was the important thing? How you were gonna feel about yourself as proud of everybody else felt?
That's a really good question. Well, I have a very articulate self-hater in me. It's very savvy at breaking me down. Even today, I struggle with it. So I was aware of that, because I'm also good at turning it out at people. Because I have language. In prison, I was one of those guys who always I knew how to get at people, break people down. So judgment was a skill of mine, outward and inward. It cannibalizes me. But I knew when I was changing that, I was powered, and a lot of my activities, it was so easy to see, were animated by insecurity. That's it, and that's all. I exhibited almost every human insecurity you can imagine. And going back and reviewing my life as I started writing in prison, It was easy. I didn't even have to drill deep down. In every story where I was fucking up, it was like, oh yeah, I was animated by a wound here, and it triggered some insecurity, and then I did that. So knowing that I was just this rich lake of insecurities, it was like, well then, if I have all these insecurities, I have a lot of problems with the way I look at myself. And I need to change that angle on myself. I need to bring a different lens in here. And this is where Eastern philosophy was helpful. Christian philosophy was terrible for me. I've been trying to forgive my dad forever. But at the center of forgiveness is, I forgive you, I. And I didn't understand why I could never forgive my dad, because I realized that to me, I telling you I'm going to forgive you did not feel like a higher theme. It felt like a vanity, meaning I am going to bestow something on you, and the universe has been wrong, and guess what? I'm going to make it even now, like that. And so the I at the center of forgiveness, no wonder it was always a vanity for me. I'm the one giving you the forgiveness, and it never worked because it was always underwritten by vanity, not generosity. Now, compassion, which I learned from the Eastern philosophies, was like, I looked at my dad and I didn't see he did anything to me. I saw when he was a child all the viciousness that had been done to him, all the brutalities that my grandfather had admitted to, my aunts and uncles had talked about, my dad had talked about. And so when I saw him, and I remembered that he had bit us and choked us with a belt, or punched us in the face, or kicked us in the ribs, every time I thought about that, I thought, it wasn't about me. If you lined up 100 sons, he would have done it to all of them, because it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my ego, Joe Loya. I'm incidental in that contact. Yeah, it hit me, but I didn't let it hit me. Compassion allowed me to say, I don't owe you forgiveness at all. You did that because you were wounded. You did that because you were hurt. And when I was able to do that and get that off my, to have compassion for my dad, then I was able to start having compassion for myself and say, yeah, Joe, you do these terrible things. You've done these terrible things, but look at what happened. You didn't ask for none of this stuff that demented you early. None of it. And so that conversation with myself shifted because I studied these principles, or familiarized myself with principles of compassion as opposed to forgiveness, so that I could walk through the world now, and when things happen to me, I didn't feel like they were happening to me. They were happening. I was incidental in that, and so I didn't need to forgive him. I still haven't to this day ever forgiven my dad, but we have this great, thriving, loving relationship because I have compassion for him. What he did to me had nothing to do with me. That's the way I look at that.
Great insight.
Does
Thank you.
Does that help answer?
Very powerful. Thank you. Anybody
Do I
else?
know you? Are you Maricela?
No.
Oh, you're Trini. Okay. I'm like, I can't see your full face.
I know.
Okay.
It's Trini. It's Trini.
I'm like, is that Maricela Norte? I can't see.
You might send out his old friend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Anybody else here, or anybody online, or?
No.
Okay, so
All right.
anybody else with questions, or?
Last.
Yeah.
Going once, going twice.
Yeah, we're doing.
Oh, here we go. Right here, we got
That's
it.
an auction.
It's not a question, it was just a comment that, I was gonna ask you, how was the relationship with your dad, and you answered it, and I'm really happy that the two and your dad are good together now. That's very important.
Yeah, it is. It's hugely important. It's hugely important. You know.
I'm happy for you, and to
Thank you.
all of you for that.
Thank you. I feel like of all the accomplishments that I've had, and I've had some good accomplishments for coming from where I came from, I feel like the fact that me and my brother and my dad have a loving relationship now after our home was decimated. I mean, like, we were in foster care, we weren't with, we both hated him and stuff. The fact that we were able, it speaks a lot to my dad too, because my dad did put a lot of seeds and expose us to things. We want to be loving people. We got that from my dad and my mother. They genuinely wanted to be animated by the higher themes, and love of being one of them. That landed in me, that took root in me. And so I knew the frequency was there because I had it as a child, and I was always on the lookout for it, you know? And so now that we get to have it, it's a beautiful thing. It's wonderful to see my dad in the jails talking to all these men who are blaming their kids still, and the wives and the girlfriends. They brought it on, and they hadn't have done this to me. He remembers all that language he used to do, and he calls them out. Like the preacher, my dad goes off on them. He gets up there and he's like, and they got tattoos on their face, tattoos on their neck, all these tough guys. And he's like, yeah, no, it doesn't pass with me. You guys are in the wrong. But here's a good thing. You can fix it. It's not totally, and then we tell our story about how if we got it, then if we did it, they can do it. It's my favorite story of all my stories of my life is this story.
Yeah.
The crime stories are fun. They're really kind of like there are a lot of the 30 bank robberies. There's a bunch of fun bank robberies in there, the getaways. But yeah, that's my favorite. I'm glad you appreciate that. Thank you for telling me that.
Yeah. Oh, Maricela or Trini has another question.
No, the other thing that occurs to me is not just going backwards with your father and undoing that, but then breaking the cycle with your daughter. That's huge.
That's exactly
No,
right.
that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Now, here's the interesting thing, though. So I knew that I was raised organizing my life around my dad's moods, and then I made everyone organize their life around my moods. So when I was coming out of prison, the thing I told myself was like, I need to figure out a way to not be this angry person where everyone's like walking on eggshells. Because when I'm the violent home like that, I was raised in, my dad came home, the way he slammed the door, I could like, oh shit. Like, I knew the car door closing, what was gonna happen that night. So like, I didn't want anyone to fear that I was gonna be violent. So interestingly enough, my daughter, who is 16 now, doesn't ever fear I'm gonna be violent. But because I had so much trauma growing up, and because it's important for me not to have people fear that I'm going to be violent, because I'm not a violent person anymore. But I had to manage myself. And so when the PTSD would kick in with me and I had to go to the back room and shut myself down and be in my head and try to just process and cry and do whatever, that was still creating dark, intense mood thing for somebody who was being raised sensitive and all this stuff. It turns out that I was still impacting the mood of the home. Not the way my dad did, and certainly not intentionally. I was actually trying to bring myself down so I wouldn't be it wouldn't spill onto them. And I could not protect them from still having this intensity walking around because I'm brooding and mental illness and PTSD and all the other things that come from having that are the baggage of my childhood. That's the curse. That is still hurt. It hurt my daughter. My daughter was powerfully impacted by that. Told me that that's been traumatizing for them. So even though I'm a dad who doesn't hit, and dad who was really trying to do the best thing, my life still has so much toxicity in it that I have to constantly manage. That ended up being a point of contention between my daughter and I the last couple of years. And we've been able to talk and work it out. And but that was, so I'm saying that I broke one cycle, but then there's this residual stuff that ends up still creating some collateral damage in the home that I didn't see coming because I was so trying not to give the experience of the other home, right? So that's just the irony of it all, and that's also the sadness of the legacy of people who have been as broken, experienced as much trauma as I have. But good for my daughter. I mean, they're very articulate. They let me know. We work it through. They recognize I'm still about the love, and so we're able to work through that. But it's not without, it's been sad for me actually. When they told me that, I was like, oh man, I ended up fucking up, even though I was trying not to fuck. It's just. But that's also part of being a parent. I mean.
Well, this is why I would recommend, especially a lot of parents. I talk to a lot of parents who have those issues. I recommend reading this book, but it's also just following what you're saying, because I think that we as parents, mother and fathers, or both together, do create an ecosystem in a house.
Yeah.
And we don't know how powerful that could be. And that ecosystem is not all bad, but there's things in it that can carry a child to a very restrictive prison cell-like life if you're not careful as a parent.
Yeah.
It's very important to help give them the keys of liberation early. And I think that's why I recommend this book to anybody, especially those parents. I got a lot of people come to me. My son's in gang, he's going to jail. My daughter's on drugs. There's so much issues out there with our kids. There's suicide issues. This is a powerful story, how you can overcome, but you got to be careful not to overcome in such a way that you forget your deep humanity. It's very important to keep that intact,
True story.
whatever that is. So the man who outgrew his prison cell, Joe Loya. You can get the book at tiachuchas.org/bookstore. You can order this book and any other book through our bookstore. But please come back, spread the word. We will put this out on YouTube and other places so
Great.
this conversation can continue.
Nice.
And we'll come back. We'll do it again because the good thing about this book, it's going to bring you off for a long time. So we'll
I hope
come
so.
back and we'll do it again.
Yeah, great, thanks.
So,
Thanks,
well,
Luis.
we
Thank
wanna
you all for
thank
coming,
you
I
all.
appreciate it.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Have a good evening, good week, good month, good year. Thank you.